through early investments. This meeting is being recorded and it should be available immediately on YouTube. And we have closed captions available in the menu if you want to take advantage of that. The PowerPoint is posted on the Graduation Equity webinar page. So if you want to follow along, that's there. And we'll also put it in the chat. This webinar is brought to you through the Office of Student Engagement and Supports within the Office of the Superintendent of Public Instruction. At OSPI, we believe each student needs to be prepared for post-secondary pathways, careers, and civic engagement. The Graduation Equity webinar series was created with the purpose of highlighting practices that increase access to education and ultimately to graduation. Through our webinars, we're striving to go beyond equality, to think about the opportunities we have to examine and dismantle current policies and practices that result in disparate outcomes for our students. We want to acknowledge historical contexts and engage our students, families, and communities as partners in decision-making to create the kind of schools that we know kids will thrive in. I want to share with you this overlapping ancestral lands map. I'm showing it to you because I think it's important to acknowledge the land and the tribes that have stewarded it since time immemorial and who still live here today. I am super grateful to live in this really beautiful place. And we ask that the participants of this meeting honor the traditional lands on which each of you are located today. And we'll paste some links in the chat to help. In my life, I mostly travel around the intersection of the traditional lands of the Squaxin Island, Coast Salish, Cowlitz, and Nisqually tribes. Tribal consultation is a great way to get to know your local tribes and begin relationships that benefit students and their families. If you'd like to know more about it, we'd love to connect you with our Office of Native Education. I want to take a moment to acknowledge the diversity in this webinar and express my own appreciation that you're here today. In trying to process recent events, I'm reminded of a quote from Cornel West who said, "Justice is what love looks like in public." And I've been sad and angry with our really flawed justice system. And I hope y'all are taking the time to talk about it and ask questions. And even though it's hard and often emotionally exhausting, as a leader, you have the power to signal other people. And I think this is an opportunity for us to respond. We want to encourage you to consider where you have influence and what you know needs to change to get closer to the type of schools that will best serve each student. Some of that's creating baseline awareness with diversity, equity, and inclusion training. This month at OSPI, our leadership is walking the walk by providing us with an all-day, all-staff training on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it's to give us a shared language and to start to have the critical conversations that are going to steer us toward a better OSPI. Another way that we might delve into this as a system is to look at adopting practices that heal and strengthen our communities. If you'd like to learn more about what this might look like at your school, you can check out OSPI's Learning Assistance Program's menu, behavior menu of best practices. We chose to talk about early learning today because we know that preschool and early elementary set the foundation for how successful our students will be over the course of their school experiences. And we know that early learning systems can be strengthened with the right supports so that students can get the help that they need when they need it. We're hoping this webinar will help you to learn the importance of early learning and high leverage moves for your system, learn strategic ways that WA Kids can help you, and that you'll benefit from hearing about Bellingham Public Schools' approach to early learning. We'll also share with you our best resources to help you assess and level up your early learning systems. I'm joined today by our OSPI Director of Early Learning, Karma Hugo, and she has brought along with her Rachel Eifler, the Equity and School Improvement Coordinator at Northeastern Washington, ESD 101, as well as Bellingham Public Schools, Assistant Superintendent of Teaching and Learning, Christy Dominguez, and the Director of Teaching and Learning, Tom Gresham. We are so glad you're here. Thanks for taking the time to present today. We like to get to know our audience, so we would love for you to share your role, your grade band, and how familiar you are with early learning and Hope Science. And we're going to get that poll going. If we can. And it looks like I don't have access to polls for once, so maybe Bonnie can help me out. Thank you, Bonnie. And we can, thank you so much. And Bonnie, do you want to share with us the results that you're seeing in there?
I sure can. We have quite a few people still submitting. We have a lot of counselors. We have administrators. I see some district office staff, middle, high school, elementary, some both. It's pretty even. And the majority, 72% of the people are somewhat familiar with the topic.
All right. That is great.
I'll give it another second and then I'll close it.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Bonnie.
Mm-hmm.
Well, next we're going to go to Karma, and Karma is going to tell us a little bit about some of the big ideas behind supporting pre-K to third grade and why it's so important. So Karma, let's talk.
Great. Thank you, Kathy. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I'm honored to get to be with you today, especially as we are at an historic moment for early learning, both nationally and here in Washington. You may be hearing about President Biden's plan for universal preschool, the intention that all 3, 4, and 5-year-olds have access to early care and education. And it's very exciting that this may happen and to contemplate the role of public schools in that. It's also an historic time for early learning in Washington state. In January of 2020, Governor Inslee sent a letter requesting that OSPI work in collaboration with the Department of Children, Youth, and Families to improve the alignment and integration of high-quality early learning programs administered by both agencies, with the ultimate goal of increasing access. This request aligns with OSPI's vision of an equity-based whole child education system and reflects the efforts of school districts across Washington striving to build early learning programs that close opportunity gaps and develop strong foundations for future learning. Further, Superintendent of Public Instruction Chris Rakedahl named building strong foundations for early learners as a key strategic goal for OSPI, with high priority objectives across the pre-K third grade continuum. This goal draws attention to our youngest students and focuses on inclusive, anti-bias, asset-based strategies to address gaps in kindergarten readiness that persist into third grade and beyond, including the expansion of inclusive preschool programs, transitional kindergarten, and best practices for K-3 assessment and instruction. The reason for focusing on early learning in our public schools are many, and we will be sharing some of those reasons with you today. But I think the importance of early learning overall is well illustrated by the parable of the river. So next slide, please, Kathy. This parable has been attributed to the American disabilities activist Irving Zola and to community organizers Saul Alinsky, among others. And it goes like this. There was once a quiet fishing village on the bank of a large river. One day, a fisherman noticed something in the water. It was a child struggling to keep her head above the swiftly flowing current. Without hesitation, the fisherman jumped into the cold water and pulled her to shore. No sooner did the fisherman manage to revive her than he saw another child in the river being carried downstream. As before, he jumped in and brought the child to safety. But again and again, this happened. And soon, so many children and adults were floating past that all the other fishermen got in the water too and began frantically pulling people to shore. Other people from the village joined in, bringing towels, blankets, building fires, serving food to help out. Though they managed to pull many people out of the fast-moving river, more and more kept coming. All day and into the night, the villagers spent rescuing people from the river. They themselves grew tired and began running out of resources. Finally, the fisherman who very first spotted someone floating down the river had an epiphany. He realized that someone needed to go upstream and find out what was causing so many people to end up in the river in the first place. He trekked upstream, where he discovered bridges in various states of repair. Some were strong and sturdy, others were missing boards or had flimsy railings. The fisherman was not surprised that so many people were falling in the river because of these poorly made bridges. He could observe that those who had access to strong bridges were protected. And even though it was evident that all of the bridges could use more reinforcement, it was easy to see which bridges needed the most attention. In this parable, certain groups of people are more likely to fall in the river than others, not because of individual weaknesses or intrinsic flaws, but because of inequities in their means to cross the river. The parable also illustrates how easily we can get locked into reactive practices. There was an urgency to rescuing people from the river, and the villagers had to fortify themselves to be able to continually rescue so many people from the river day after day. We can't stop rescuing people from the river, but we can alleviate a lot of the downstream distress and long-term negative consequences if we go upriver and invest in building strong foundations there. Next slide, please. Early investments have lasting benefits to individuals and to our collective society. James Heckman, the Nobel Prize winning economist, has determined that $1 invested in early childhood can yield as much as $16 in return. And some of the benefits of these early investments include an increase in the graduation rates, especially for students of color, increases in college matriculation, economic development and personal income into adulthood, increase in overall health and well-being, and also a decrease in special education placements and remediation, educational expenditures associated with interventions, dropout rates, incarceration rates, and crime costs. And just as a reminder, when we refer, sorry, Kathy, that's fine to be at that slide. And just as a reminder, when we refer to early learning and early childhood, we are talking about children from prenatal all the way to third grade, an age range that encompasses a wide variety of programs offered in our school districts, from pregnant and parenting teen programs, inclusive preschool programs, transitional kindergarten, and all the way up through third grade. Districts investing in high quality early learning programs, and high quality being the validated operative term here, are realizing a return on their investments. And we'll get to hear some examples of this from Bellingham in just a bit. Next slide, please. Investments start with access to high quality care and preschool programs, which provide opportunities for children and also for their families. And my colleague, Ronnie, just dropped in some information so that you can link to this same map that we're looking at here. So for families who depend on a safe and nurturing environment for their children while they're working, access can be an important pathway to achieving the goals that they have to support their family. So the image that we're looking at here is from the childcare need and supply map that's provided by the Department of Children, Youth, and Families. It provides the estimated percentage of the childcare need that is being met, the estimated percent of childcare need that is being met based on the number of families with all available parents in the workforce. So currently, only about 34% of children ages 0 to 5 needing childcare are enrolled in licensed childcare programs or preschools. The particular view we're seeing now shows the percentage of needs met for preschool age children. And as you can see, there are vast differences in the availability of preschool across Washington state, with between 32 and 68% of children being served, depending on the area of the state. COVID has really highlighted the unique need of our young learners and how important the availability of early learning is to families' participation in the workforce. As we rebound from the pandemic, and evolve to meet the needs of our communities, schools will play an increasingly important role in access by developing partnerships with community-based programs, developing programs, and creating pathways for children and families to increase their opportunities and their hope. Next slide, please. Schools also play a key role in access for students with disabilities ages 3 to 5, for whom they have a federal obligation to serve in the least restrictive environment. Each bar on this graph that we're seeing represents a state or territory of the United States and shows the percentage of students with disabilities who attend and receive the majority of their special education services and a regular early childhood program. And as you can see, Washington ranks among the lowest in the nation for inclusive placements. All children deserve the right to engage with peers in a regular early childhood program when it is healthy and safe for them to do so. And increasing access to early learning programs that are inclusive increases access not just for students with disabilities, but also their typically developing peers. And furthermore, the wide range of children's development in the early years indicates that not all children with developmental delays have IEPs. Some educators view preschool and kindergarten as wait and see times, and it's understandable to want to give children time to settle in and acclimate to school. But all children have strengths and areas of growth, and if left unaddressed, children with fine motor and other common developmental delays, for instance, can end up needing IEPs when early support could have mitigated that need and spared them the stress and frustration. Intervention is more effective than remediation, and intentional focus on children's development and early intervention are key components of building strong foundations for all children. Next slide, please. Due to lack of access or other choices families have made, kindergarten is the first formal early learning opportunity for many children. This also means that WaKids is our first opportunity to collect widespread data to help us learn about children and the developmental progress that they've made on their way to kindergarten. This slide shows the percentage of children by demographics who demonstrated the skills and abilities typically associated with children beginning kindergarten. When I see this data with such significant differences among children, one of the first things I wonder is how this information is shared with families. We know from interviews that the early learning team at OSPI has been conducting over the last 3 years that even just the term kindergarten readiness creates stress and a sense of failure among parents, which is not at all the hopeful excitement that should characterize the beginning of school. As you hear the term kindergarten readiness here and going forward, please be thinking more about the readiness of our educators to support children as they come, however they may arrive. The only requirement to be ready for kindergarten is to be 5 by August 31st. Next slide, please. Here is the 2019 WaKids data by student program and characteristics. This time we see the contrast between students with disabilities, for instance, which is the yellow bar at the very bottom, as compared to their non-disabled peers. And while WaKids confirms that students enter kindergarten with a wide range of skills and abilities and shows us gaps among students that are evident early, the way we talk about and use this data can either fuel hope or diminish it. Knowing the skills and abilities that children bring, as well as the next developmental milestone on the path, establishes clear goals that build hope and confidence in children, families, and educators. And knowing that we have tendencies toward bias that may limit our ability to see the skills and abilities of all children, and using the data to examine our perception and practices are important steps that we can take toward more hopeful and more equitable outcomes. Next slide, please. When we analyzed 3rd grade Smarter Balanced assessment results of students assessed as part of WaKids when they went from kindergarten to 3rd grade, we found that even among students who were kindergarten ready in literacy and math, those who fell behind and didn't meet 3rd grade Smarter Balanced standards were significantly more likely to be American Indian, Alaska Native, Black, African American, English language learners, low income, and students with disabilities. This means that children who arrive at kindergarten ready lost ground by 3rd grade. And the more that I've learned about hope, the more concerned that I've become that what we're seeing in the data is perhaps more than a sign that children are losing ground, but a sign that they're perhaps losing hope. Hope that school is a place for them, where they can build their agency and set goals that matter to them, and that this may be causing apathy in children early on, and an apathy that we may spend years trying to turn around. So how can we address this before it happens? And how can we keep children on a strong upward trajectory? One way is to go back to the idea of school readiness being about the adults, about the school, and not as much about the children. A researcher named Beth Hatt from Illinois State University spent a year observing in a kindergarten classroom in order to understand how children's classroom experiences shape their academic identity. Her major finding was that children and parents and educators were conflating smartness with compliant behavior. In this classroom, children who engaged in what the teacher deemed inappropriate behavior, which could have been anything from not sitting still to actually crying loudly when upset, had to very publicly move a tiny car from green to yellow to red. When interviewed by the researcher, overwhelmingly children identified smartness as not having to move your car. And even more alarming than is that those children who had to move their cars frequently were already identifying themselves as not smart or good at school by kindergarten. Classroom environments and teacher expectations that are misaligned with child development are major contributing factors to behavior incidents and low student self-perception. They shape who students believe they are and what they can become. And this is too important to overlook. Assuring developmentally appropriate play-based environments for young students led by educators who understand young children is one of the most important levers we have in closing the opportunity gaps and building hope. Next slide, please. There are many ways that schools can build and develop strong foundations to close gaps and build hope. This Friday, OSPI and the 9 educational service districts will be launching the Pre-K 3rd grade Leadership Network. This network, which will meet for 90 minutes 6 times over the course of this year, has been created to support school districts in identifying and developing school improvement strategies focused on the early years, preschool through 3rd grade. There's still time to register, and I believe that you'll receive a link to be able to sign up, and we hope that you will. Next slide, please. And one of the key resources that we will be using in the network is the framework for planning, implementing, and evaluating P3 approaches. It was created specifically for school districts to assist them in developing strong early learning programs. This tool is readily available to all now and easy to use. I encourage you to check it out and to join us for the Pre-K 3rd grade Leadership Network. Thank you for this opportunity to share with you today. I'm going to turn things over now to my colleague, Dr. Rachel Eifler, who is going to tell us a little bit more about hope and why it matters.
Good morning. Thank you, Karma. Well, good morning. I'm happy to be here and be talking a little bit about hope today and what that means. And so when we think about hope, for everybody, hope is a critical psychological strength that we all want to possess. And hope can really help children and adults overcome trauma and adversity. The great thing about hope is it can be learned, it can be measured. We have many responsibilities and opportunities in education that we can invest in hope early for our students. Next slide, please. So we're going to talk a little bit about hope versus hope science. And so oftentimes we think about a wish versus hope science. And so when we wish for something, we're wishing that the future will be better than it is. I wish that it would snow today. But the difference between that and hope is that we have a belief that that will happen. We believe that it can be so. Now, when we move into this idea of hope science, we're actually putting some parameters around it. And so we're thinking about, for hope science, we actually need 3 things where there's specific things around goals, agency, and pathways. And so we need to be able to see the future. We have to have a goal to be able to get to that for the hope. There needs to be pathways, a way to get there, a way to be able to navigate barriers, and there needs to be some agency. The beauty of this, as I said before, is these are skills that can be taught. They are skills that we can really work with students. Next slide, please. We'll talk about each one of these a little bit more in depth. And so essentially being able to envision and plan for the future, being able to successfully navigate pathways, and barriers along the way, and to maintain motivation through agency really helps to develop hope in children and in adults, anybody. And so we're going to talk a little bit on this next slide here of how this translates into early learning. And so in early learning, we talk about pre-kindergarten through third grade. We have many responsibilities and opportunities to build hope in our children and our families. And we're going to talk about those in a little bit more detail. But when we think about goals, this is often a time where families are beginning to set goals for their children. They can see the vision for their future for their children. Oftentimes, schools presents many opportunities to get to those goals that they hope that children will achieve. Children also have many opportunities to achieve goals on a daily basis through social emotional goals, through academic goals. Schools have a responsibility to also offer pathways for children and for families. Many families see school as a pathway for children to be able to reach their goals. We also have many opportunities to come alongside and create pathways in education and to support in navigating barriers for both our children and our families. And last, this agency piece. And this is another one. As educators, we have a big responsibility and many opportunities to build agency in our students young. Agency is a motivation to be able to reach your goals. It's the way to be able to get there. And in early learning, we have many opportunities to build these agency skills, to build the self-motivation. These really are those precursor skills where children need opportunities to learn those skills and to practice those skills so that they can be able to navigate those barriers and get to their goal. Next slide, please. In Washington State, we use WaKids, which is a tool for all kindergarten classrooms, use WaKids for incoming kindergartners. Oftentimes it's thought of it as an assessment, and it is a whole child assessment. It's required by all kindergarten teachers across the state, but it's much more than assessment. We do have a whole child observation-based assessment that's strengths-based, allows teachers to pinpoint where children are in these developmental progressions and to be able to make decisions accordingly. Lots of opportunities to build hope within that assessment, but we also have this family connection requirement where all kindergarten teachers meet individually with families before the beginning of school year, and the early learning collaboration where we're thinking about smooth transitions and the responsibility for school districts and communities to work together and make this the most hopeful time that we can for children. So we're going to talk a little bit about how WaKids and other school-based supports can build hope through different areas, starting with families. And so when we think about building hope, we want to build hope with families, with children, and with educators. So for families, WaKids provides many opportunities to build hope through the family connection meeting, when teachers are able to meet individually, when administrators are able to welcome families in, to hear about where the goals are for their students, to be able to communicate what they want for their students, to be able to think about what pathways might be necessary, but also to be able to provide data for where your students are. Here are your child's strengths, and here's how we're going to help them move along. Also, our school-based supports, WaKids provides data so that we can be prepared. As Karma said, we think about those adults. We look at the WaKids data. It can tell us, what do we need to do to be prepared for the students coming into kindergarten? We can provide opportunities to share goals using the data, to create pathways, to monitor progress along these. And so because it is a whole child assessment, we're looking at some of these precursor skills that really are these hope building skills. And we have opportunities to know where students are and provide opportunities for them to grow. The next one is we want to think about, how do we build hope with children? And we have many opportunities, so you can go to the next slide, please, Kathy, to build opportunities with children in our classrooms, in our school systems. And we think about, we can build hope both through the experiences and opportunities that we provide to children, and by really being intentional about teaching and assessing those precursor skills. And so through those experiences, when children have experiences that allow them to engage with their peers, to engage with adults in positive ways and really collaborate and have those positive interactions throughout the day, when they have those experiences to be able to do things that they're interested in, to be able to have ongoing play-based learning experiences, to be able to have communication, they really are able to experience and have that opportunity to learn those skills and to practice those skills. It's up to the adults to be intentional about really teaching those skills and providing those opportunities where children can do that in a developmentally appropriate environment. We also have an opportunity as adults to know where children should be developmentally in some of these skills, to understand child development. What does this look like? Where is this child on this continuum, and how can I help him or her move forward? What are the skills that they need to be able to progress along these foundational skills to become hopeful. And then finally, we want to build hope with our educators. So you can go to the next one. So with our educators, we really want to, the adults in front of our children, we really want to have hopeful adults in front of our children. It's up to us as adults to be hopeful ourselves. As school systems, we have many opportunities to create hopeful environments for our educators as well. When administrators understand and can support what is developmentally appropriate practice, what does that look like in the classroom? What kind of supports will my teachers need to be able to implement that? Educators also understand child development. They know where children should be. They have opportunities to observe strengths and make decisions. And the ability to use a zone of proximal development and scaffold supports for students. When educators have the skills that they need and the support that they need, they can create those hopeful environments. We also build hope through relationships. As educators, we want to have classrooms that allow us to get to know each one of our students individually. When classroom routines allow for teachers to interact individually with students and get to know them, we can really, again, build those hope building skills. Educators also provide opportunities to build relationships and have two-way communication with families. When we are open and we talk to families about what the goals are, when we are following up with families and collaborating with families, we have an opportunity to build much more hope-rich environments as well. We also want our educators to have opportunities to build relationships and collaborate with other educators so that they can grow their practice and feel like they are the experts in the room, so that they can adjust and based on what they need. Next slide, please. Oh, and so I'm going to go and turn this over to Kefi, and she is going to lead us in our next session. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Eifler, and to Karma. This is really good information, and just thinking about how much is possible so early on and how do you get kids off to a solid start is just so important. So thank you so much. We are going to have a poll. We're wondering what area of early learning needs the greatest investment in your system. And yeah, and Bonnie will report out our results here in a second. But we're curious where people were at and what you're thinking about this year, and hopefully we can deliver some supports to follow up.
Thanks, Cappy. We're about 50%. So I'll give it another minute or so.
Yeah, and while we're there, I'm just going to check in with the chat. It looks like we have a question. Do you see overlap between the fostering hope recommendations for environment and relationships with the requirements to meet the SBA third grade assessment? And that's the last one on the chat. Overlap between fostering hope recommendations with requirements to meet the SBA third grade assessment. I'm not as familiar with the assessment content. So Carmen, do you know?
This question has my wheels turning. I would love to know more what you're thinking there, Will. Yeah, if you want to elaborate on that question, we can keep thinking about it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you're thinking about it, Kathy, I do have some results for you.
Okay.
The increasing access to early learning programs seem to be well, now we have people submitting some more. Engaging families and increasing access to early learning programs and opportunities are what's really important too. That's almost 100% of the results. So supporting educators and understanding child development, it comes in third.
Mm. Yeah, awesome. So that's good to know. I think this year we are looking at resources and hoping to get you some fresh stuff soon. So what we're going to do next is we have with us Bellingham Public Schools. We've got Christy and Tom, and we're just going to ask them some questions about what they've been doing. And I'm going to stop my share so we can just have a conversation. So I'd love to hear a little bit about how Bellingham came to recognize the need to invest in pre-K to third grade, or I'm sorry, prenatal to third grade. Is that more correct?
Yep, that's great. Actually, I'll take this one. It actually started in about 2009 was when the real tide began to shift. It was the year prior to Dr. Greg Baker coming on as the superintendent, and people were starting to recognize early childhood as a key strategy. And as someone who has been in early learning, both private and public sector for about 30 years, those of us who have been committing our life work to that, we knew that it was a key strategy, but it wasn't necessarily how K-12 systems saw themselves. And so at that time, we started a tuition-based kindergarten, full day kindergarten program. And that in itself proved to have all sorts of equity issues. And when Dr. Greg Baker was hired, he engaged in an entry plan process where he visited every school and really got to know the community and thought through what are the leadership moves that we need to make in order to increase graduation rates. And mind you, he was from an alternative high school background, and so he didn't necessarily have early childhood as part of his landscape. But it quickly became apparent. And I think, Karma, what you were talking about, that foundation, K-12 was set up really in a lot of ways on reaction, trying to mitigate what had happened to children prior to them entering the K-12 system. And so early childhood came up as a key strategy. And at that year, when he came, we had 9 tuition-based full-day K programs. And he made a real courageous move that halfway through the year, he shifted all our title schools to full-day K free, full-day K programs ahead of state funding. With the following year, we went district-wide full-day K prior to the state's investment in that. And, it meant that we had to take funds from something else. It's not like we just got all these new dollars. It meant a real commitment. We used sustainability dollars. We shifted funds from our high school. Maybe we didn't purchase a curriculum that year or whatever, but, and we began really looking at full day K. But what we quickly realized is 1 year is not an inoculation. So it was really about that landscape. I came on to central office the following year and began thinking through what's our role in this process, and quickly realized that, we're just one stakeholder amongst many in the early childhood game. And I think back to probably a key learning moment for me as a leader. I got invited to go to coffee with a child care director in town. And, K-12s, we can be kind of arrogant thinking we're the end all be all of education. And this child care director reminded me that when we made the decision for full day K, which they agreed with, we didn't do it with our early learning community at the table. And so it became something we did to the birth to 5 community. And so it was in that moment I realized that this is going to be about partnerships. We're just one stakeholder amongst many. And so we began investing in partnerships. And so now early childhood is not a Bellingham School District focus, it's the community focus. And we all have a role to play in that.
Yeah, that's an amazing early investment to go before you have full funding from the state. And how cool to prioritize the title schools. I feel like it's just like such a boss equity move.
It was courageous to do that at the time. So
very cool. Well, COVID has made a big impact this year. So I'm curious, how did you all go about preparing and adjusting? Did it make an impact on how you approach things?
Tom and I've talked about this with our early learning team. In a lot of ways, the early childhood programs were ahead of the game. We knew that families were a key partner. We understood child development as a foundational driver, and we also had strong relationships with our community. So actually, when COVID hit, I was moved to the city's emergency response around childcare. And because of our strong partnerships here in the region, not just Bellingham, all 7 school districts and our community providers, we actually enacted a childcare coalition, and it really became centering around the childcare providers because they were staying open while school districts were closing. And I remember when we were told that we needed to invest in childcare, some districts did try to run childcare. We're not in the childcare business, but we can support it well. And so we began shifting our focus to ask, what is it our childcare providers need in order to stay open and be able to support children and families? And so our nurses actually were deployed to childcare settings. We began delivering food to childcare settings, and not just in Bellingham, all of Whatcom County. We opened up our school building so childcare providers could run within it. They needed Wi-Fi, we provided it. They needed subs, we provided it. It became a what can we do in service of you? And our whole goal was to make sure that on the other side of COVID, which we're continuing to mitigate different aspects of it, it's how do we make sure that we have a thriving early learning workforce and community and access on the other side of this. And so it's not a us or them, it's a we, and it's a constant, battle of really centering children and families and asking what it is they need and how do we collectively pool our resources in that way.
Yeah, what an amazing partnership, and such a great idea to pool the resources of all those childcare providers at this time, just thinking about the huge need for staffing and and the lasting effect of that coalition, I think, going forward, like now that it's formed, that's a really powerful supportive group to help answer the needs out there. I'm wondering a little bit about, so how do you see administrators in Bellingham demonstrating that early childhood time is a priority just internally and externally?
Well, I'll jump in on this one. First of all, I just want to say my response is going to be not so much from a central office lens, because I've only been at that position for about 5 months, but more from a building leader lens, which I did for the previous 10 years. And I think that broadly, two key things come up, and they would be space and time when we think about prioritization of early learning. When we started transitional kindergarten in Bellingham, we call it Promise K. Christy came to me and said, "Hey, we're going to do this new thing in like 2 weeks. We need a classroom." And the school I was in, amazing group of people. And so we shifted a reading program into the staff room, and my office became the staff room. And that's where we added in a new transitional kindergarten class. And so right now, my early learning colleague, Debbie Haney, and I have been working with our principals to plan for 10 Promise K classrooms across the district. And it's been fun to go into places that are new host sites for us, and the creative thinking around space and how to shift people to make space for students. Externally, we also, as Christy mentioned, we have really strong partnerships with early learning partners. And so we also house Head Start and ECAP programs in several of our schools. So we don't run the program, but we house it in our buildings. Then thinking about time, I was thinking about Rachel and Pathways to Hope, and thinking about the most hopeful time in a kindergarten day is play-based learning. And so we make sure that we've reserved 90 minutes of time for purposeful play. And because kids have goals, that's how they start. They say, what am I going to do today? Well, or think about, and then they have the agency and the pathways, because the other thing that we've done is we've standardized all the materials available, so that we have equitable availability of materials across all our kindergarten classrooms, because we believe the environment is the third teacher. And it's just the best part of the day to come in and see every child engaging. And certainly they have challenges in that they have arguments about who's going to use what materials and how do we share these things. But that's the beauty of it, because that's when the teacher gets to step in and help kids develop social emotional skills. And then I think that in terms of time, we also our building leaders have prioritized their own time in terms of learning. So, for example, we have, I think it's 5 of our elementary principals, maybe 4, going through a P3 certification program right now. So they're investing in their own learning.
Wow, that's so cool. It's nice to see the support spread throughout the district, and just that use of space as like an indicator that it's important and that it continues to be a priority. I think I know at OSPI, if we're asked to give up our desk, we might that's a big deal. So
It's a big deal there too. Yeah. It doesn't come without some good conversation.
Yeah, I wasn't saying it was easy, Kathy.
I know. I'm just saying, like, wow, that's impressive for me. So well, I'm curious, you guys have been working on this thing for a long time now. So have you looked at outcomes? Has Bellingham seen this pay out in any way?
Yeah, I think back to Karma's slide about for every dollar you invest is a $16 return on investment. And in many ways, that's the economic benefit, but the hope benefit and the changes of generations is immense. So I would argue it's even greater. We started our early learning journey really just focused in on kindergarten. And in that time, we've created a landscape. So we really do have programs prenatal through 3rd grade. We have grads program, which is a CTE program. And in the last 10 years, we've opened 3 childcare centers in 3 of 4 of our high schools. And so we're the only teen parent program from the Canadian border to Everett. And so anyone who lives in that demographic area can come and attend our schools and access free childcare and get their diploma. So we have, out of our teen parents, we have about a 90% graduation rate. Last year in the middle of COVID, which was a very trying time, I don't know about you, but I remember being a young parent, even just going to the grocery store seemed like a lot of work. And we had 9 of our teen parents graduate in the midst of COVID. And many of them go on to higher education. Promise K, Tom talked about that, now transitional K. We have served over 900 students in the last 10 years. Only 5 of those 900 plus students have actually ended up on a comprehensive IEP. As a former kindergarten teacher, I can tell you those are students who, had they not had access prior to kindergarten, they would have been identified and referred much earlier. So that's a big shift. And I would say we're not finding that they qualify for needing title or lap services either. So it's not just a special education. I think about, when I think about hope, I think about one of our teen moms who actually in middle school, we could not get her to come to school. She was a student that we consistently were tracking and trying to engage her in school. And then she comes to high school and at age 15, found out she was pregnant. Her goal was to drop out of high school. She was not interested in attending the one high school that had the grads program at that time. And so in the middle of the year, I requested funds and opened a childcare center at her high school so we could keep her in school. And I remember the day that we brought her down to say, you're not dropping out of school. We're building this childcare center for you. pick the spot where you want Brian's crib to be. And I remember the look on her face. It was one of the first times I remember actually able to see hope on someone's face. She is now a young mom, happily married. Brian is in 2nd grade and he's doing great. Actually, he's in 1st grade and he's doing great. He has a little brother, Gael, who, because of our partnerships, was able to get a spot in a community partner program. And so he's attending early learning, and she recently had twins. And she's the most dynamic mom. She is a huge advocate of education. So while her life changed, now we have generations of her children's lives changing. And it's those stories that we watch time and time again. And it was because of that early investment on telling someone, you matter, we will find a spot for you. What are the barriers? We're going to knock those down and create access. And it wasn't just us, right? It was a community effort that made that possible for her. But it's those moments that make all of this work worth it.
Well, that is like above and beyond, like thinking about, well, and just the caring implied in, we're not going to let you fail.
Yeah.
We're going to take care of you. I think like that's just like living the dream of what we all hope to provide to students and to our communities too, and thinking about how schools are such an integral part of just folding you in.
Absolutely.
That's amazing. Well, out in Bellingham, what do you think that school leaders can do to build hope for families and in the classroom? What do y'all think?
Well, I guess I'd say it kind of comes back to some of the similar things that I talked about in terms of building hope in the classroom. Kids need to see that they belong, they're part of, they can be successful. And so, you know, that's all parts of the day, but one of the ways that you do that is to make really wide openings so that all children can enter in. And certainly play-based learning is a really wide opening. And so I mentioned that we make sure that there's 90 minutes of play-based learning time in our kindergarten settings. We have a expectation of 60 minutes in 1st grade, and we have standardized all the materials that are available in our 1st grade classrooms. And kind of what's next for us is to continue to move that up into 2nd grade and 3rd grade. Oh gosh, I just got sidetracked. So then when we think about what building leaders can do also is understand the difference, or understand child development, I guess. I'll just say of myself, unlike Christy, I've not spent 30 years in early learning. My background is more 4th and 5th grade teacher. And so when I became a building leader, I decided I better spend some time learning about this stuff because I really know nothing. So I sat alongside our kindergarten teachers going through WAKIDS training. And I was already a big believer in strengths-based learning. But I didn't really necessarily have an understanding of how you might go about that in a elementary school. And so then I was introduced to the progressions that are part of the teaching strategy school assessment. And that was sort of like an aha moment because they help you identify what does this child do and what's the next step. And so that was a big shift for me in understanding a lot more what is sort of like just second nature for pre-K people is child development. And so when you, as a building leader, that is one of the things that you can do is really know those progressions, make them your best friend. In fact, we had a dean of students meeting yesterday for elementary, and we were talking about some of the impacts of the pandemic. And my advice to them was, make those progressions your best friend, because they're going to help you identify what is the student able to do and then what's their developmental next step, because a 2nd grader is not going to magically be able to function like a 2nd grader if they're developmentally more like a 3 or 4-year-old. They have to progress through those different stages. And so I think those would be two pieces that I would say.
Yeah.
Can I add on to that? I think sometimes when we talk about play-based learning, everyone's like, oh, that's for young children. And as I'm lucky enough in my role, I get to support programs prenatal to age 21. Special education is also one of my purviews. And it's interesting that we don't question CTE programs. I love going into culinary arts. I love going into robotics classes or aerospace. And isn't that play-based learning with developmentally appropriate materials for that age and stage of learner? And as an adult, I think about what do I like to call my hobbies? Those are often play-based learner. I'm engaging in literacy, math, science, all of those things when I'm integrating it. So when we hear the word play-based, what we mean is deep learning experiences for young children using developmentally appropriate materials. Just in a kindergarten or a first grade or second grade or preschool classroom, blocks may look like wood blocks, but those wood blocks, as time and space moves with the child, turn into tools and metal and different equipment that allow them to build cars and airplanes and all of those things that are life skills.
I'm going to add on to what Christy just said. I was walking through the school I was last principal at, had a hub where our kindergarten classes were kind of clustered. And I walked in there one day and there was a string going across the whole thing on kind of like some pulleys. And so I asked one of the kindergarten teachers, hey, what do you got going? And the kids wanted a way to communicate with one another during, we call it work time or plan to review. And so the teacher worked with those kids to rig up a pulley system, and then they would write notes to each other or draw pictures, and they'd clip it on, and then they'd do this kind of thing across the way. And I mean, when you think about all of the things that they were learning how to do embedded in that thing that they invented and wanted to do, they had pieces of science, they had writing, they had art. I mean, all sorts of great stuff that the teacher was able to teach into, all out of
the ingredients of engineering.
Yeah.
Long term. It's so cool. Oh, what an inspiring setting. Thinking about the transitions from year to year, it sounds like your materials are kind of matriculating up. How are you handling transitions from grade level to grade level? Like, are there things that you're doing that ease the way for students and families?
Yeah, I think one of the most complex transitions, because it often happens out, a lot of students are served in their birth to 5 environment outside the school building. We actually have something that Karma started years ago when she was at Northwest, when she was at the ESD 189, and that was called Dinner and Dialogue, where we came together, shared pizza, it was often pizza, with early learning providers, and we actually handed off data sets and got to know who were the providers working with children prior to entering kindergarten. That has evolved over time, and in COVID, we were really challenged. How do we come together and share and join in those relationships? And so now we have something called Snack and Yak, where we get on a huge Zoom and we go out into breakout rooms and we talk about children and families and how to support. We still use a transition form where parents know what's on this form, they sign off, and so we can continue to have those ongoing relationships. Oftentimes, if a child maybe isn't transitioning in the way that we thought they would into kindergarten, we'll invite an early learning provider to the table, because that's someone who had been with the child for multiple years. And so it's someone who knows a lot about the child, has a strong relationship with the family. The other piece too is in sharing and learning experiences. We, for example, instructional rounds are something that a lot of school districts engage in. We took it a little bit different, where we had instructional rounds between the birth to 5 community and our kindergarten teachers. And we went into one another's environments. We did a crosswalk between class and TPEP, and we began to talk about common practices. We've invested in environmental professional development. So when you go into an infant center, you're going to see those areas that we have in a kindergarten classroom, but they are just developmentally appropriate for a young child. You'll see the same areas in a toddler space or a preschool classroom, kindergarten classroom, first grade classroom. Tom mentioned that our next goal is to really look at second and third grade and do that same work through that. But it's that ongoing communication and relationship building between the adults that really supports the transition.
I'll add on, I think that the best work that we did at a building level is when we stopped thinking about transitioning kids and started thinking about transitioning adults. And so we ran instructional rounds at the end of the year so that the second grade teachers that were coming back to pick up end of first grade students could see, okay, what are the teachers in our first grade classrooms doing to support students, and then how are they going to take some of those same strategies or structures and implement those at the beginning of second grade so that students have some familiarity and some grounding points and some foundation for when they start second grade. That's not going to be this crazy gigantic leap. So we started thinking about transitioning adults less, or more so, and less about transitioning students.
Yeah, it is. That's an interesting way to look at it. I think like so often at the end of the school year, people are like, peace out. I'm not gone for the summer. Getting that time in at the beginning of the year is really hard when people are really pressed for time, and like just the integration of the crosswalk between grade levels is so important just for continuity. And I think some of the curriculums assume we're all talking to each other, and we're not necessarily, and that's a strong practice to keep
Yeah,
going.
I think Tom made a really important point. We often talk about school readiness and the onus of what the child is doing. And school readiness is all about the adults. Children are always ready for school. It's our job to be ready for them.
Yeah, truly responsive system. So I'm wondering, you've climbed a lot of mountains. What's next for Bellingham? What's on the horizon for y'all?
Yeah, continuing to work on the readiness of adults. So that's always grounding our work in child development. So that the professional development part there. I think in terms of services for children, Tom mentioned really diving into second and third grade and identifying those practices and thinking through those classroom environments. How are we using child developments to lead our understandings of instruction? And then really increasing our access for children with disabilities. That is a statewide goal that's not unique to Bellingham, but how do we really lean into that? So much of what we are seeing and what we hear from families is they'll often refer their child for evaluation, not because necessarily their child has a disability, but because they haven't been able to access a program or not at the level that they need. And so that is that's really the work we have to do, and hoping that we can make some gains on that by fall.
Mm-hmm. And I know statewide inclusionary practices has just been, we're trying our best, you know?
Yeah,
that
absolutely.
And,
that's the bridge we need to build now that's upstream, really.
Absolutely. Well, I'm wondering, I'm sure that you have really valuable lessons learned. Like, what did you wish that you had known up front? Like, if you could go back in time, what would you have changed?
Well, I'd really love some more money.
Of course.
No, honestly, I think one thing is this just really required us to roll up our sleeves and get messy and honor the work that was already happening. You know, I feel so fortunate because I had some really incredible mentors. Like I said, I had that meeting with a center director who was willing to speak a real honest truth to me. So listening, really making sure listening, centering families and students. And I think sometimes we hear, oh, well, that's Bellingham or that's Whatcom County. That really can't happen here. What we did is nothing magical. It can happen anywhere. We were determined. We had leaders who were willing to make this a priority and investment. you know, you don't necessarily have more money. So it's prioritizing. And what we know is that we needed to focus on being preventative and not reactive. And that's very hard in a system that was designed more reactionary. And so we made some really tough decisions. It wasn't always easy, as Tom said. I mean, we make it sound like, oh, this thing happened and this worked and that worked. It really required the adults to get into a space of a learner. But when you fully center students and families, it makes it a lot easier when you're really clear on what it is you're trying to accomplish. And when I think about that hope, you just need one story to really help others find the buy-in. So run some focus groups, think through what is it you're trying to accomplish, who are your community partners who are investing in this work every single day, and begin to leverage all of those different pieces together. This can happen anywhere in Washington State, and I'm excited for the direction. I appreciate Karma and her leadership, and I can't speak enough to the network opportunity. The framework by the National P3 Center really was a guide that I used when I first came on into central office. And so I highly suggest that, and just know that there's a lot of us out there willing to partner with you to do the work.
Yeah, I think for Bellingham, like one of the amazing things that you've been able to do is to bring in all of those stakeholders and to get that just diversity of perspective to create a system that really does put kids at the center. And that's so cool. I'm so glad that we got to share your stuff today. I wanted to check in. Are there questions in the Q&A? Let's see, we got one from Rachel. What was the framework that you just referenced?
And there was a slide on it earlier. It's out of the National P3 Center.
Mm-hmm.
And Karma just, or someone dropped it in the chat. Bonnie did. Bonnie just dropped it in the chat.
Thanks, Bonnie. And we have another one. Given Bellingham's change to emphasize the importance of early learning, did they see less of a drop from kindergarten WAKIDS assessment to the third grade SBA scores?
I think for some of our students we did. We have not seen it for all of our students. Keeping in mind, it's not just a 1 year. What we know about those scores, it's a compilation of what's happened in a child's life, prenatal through third grade. And so what we're really looking at is how to increase quality, not just within a year, but across the years. And so we still have work to do. This is not a fast moving change. This work takes time. You can make lots of technical changes and add a program, but without the deep adaptive work, you don't see those sustainable outcomes. And I think many communities have had investments over time in early childhood, but they've invested it based on a person who is willing to do the work and kind of champion it. It has to become system culture in order for it to happen over long periods of time. And so it's that building what Tom mentioned, a key factor in this has been our principals. They really are the hinge on the door. So how do we engage them? Making sure you're centering families, responding to what it is they're asking for and needing, knowing who your community providers are. This is not a competition. It's a collaboration. And so this is a conversation that's not just happening in Bellingham Public Schools. It's happening in our city government. Our philanthropists are talking about it. Our community providers are talking about it. And so it really has become a collective vision. And so I think in the next few years, we're going to see even more gains.
Yeah, that is the collective impact.
Yes.
Using everybody to the best of their ability. I feel like that's like a leadership goal as well, right? Is that you're
Absolutely.
using the talent you have in the place where it's most needed. Yeah. Well, we do want to share with you some resources. So I think we're going to go to that. And there's a lot of money out there with ESSER dollars, but we've also got an Unlocking Federal and State Program Funds document you can check out. And Carmen, do you want to talk through some of these resources that you provided?
Yes, I'd be happy to. Thank you, Kathy. So just back to that unlocking federal and state program funds to support student success. There's a section for preschool that lists all of the available funding sources that districts may tap into, and has a secondary portion that describes the different things that those funds may be allowed to be used for, and hopefully create a way for districts to perhaps visualize how to use those funds in ways of increasing access and quality. We would really encourage you to subscribe to our early learning newsletter. So there's a link to being able to do that. And here again in tools and videos, we see the framework that we've been discussing from the National P3 Center. We have lots of information on our web WalkKids pages on the OSPI website, resources that are designed for kindergarten and transitional kindergarten, but really have application across the early grades, resources that aren't just specific, they are designed for kindergarten specifically, but can be used across those grades. And then people, we just encourage you to reach out to us here at OSPI, and then also and the 9 ESDs across the state have incredible early learning experts who are so knowledgeable and so well connected to their early learning partners in the community. So we would really encourage you to reach out to those folks as well. And then just one last plug for our pre-K 3rd grade leadership network this Friday. There's still time to register, and we really hope that you do. So thanks for that opportunity to talk through the resources, and thanks for being here.
Yeah, those networks that have been launching have just been incredible to see, especially just like the possibility of increasing those like promising practices that you see from building to building. And you can hear, like, you can just see the little light bulbs going off for like, oh, that's a great idea. I would love to try that. And to share problems of practice, I can't recommend joining networks enough. There's always great learning to be had. Next month, we're going to be talking about mentoring with Dr. Jean Rhodes. She's a psychologist, and she's author of the book Older and Wiser, New Ideas for Youth Mentoring in the 21st Century. And we'll have Community for Youth Executive Director Stephen Song with us. So we're really excited to host them this next month. And we do have links for this in the chat, but if you've registered for this webinar, you're already registered. So if you'd love to share the link with friends that you think might be interested in learning more, mentoring is a great continuation of creating that caring, relationship-centered focus for our students. And yes, please join us. That's the thing. We'd love to get more information about how we did with this evaluation. If you'd like to give us more thoughts that aren't just in the multiple choice realm, we also have a link for kind of the long form feedback survey. So if you'd like to type more comments or make suggestions that we can't possibly cover here, please do so. We do use those results from our evaluations every month to look at our practice and try to improve our webinars. So thank you so much for your help in making us better. We're all about that continuous improvement. And if you are out here for clock hours, we just ask that you please register in PD Enroller. PD Enroller will send you an additional evaluation, and then we usually confirm your attendance for this live event within a week or so. But if you are watching the recording after the fact, we still want you to register using PD Enroller, and then you'll complete that evaluation and fill out the feedback survey. And then we'll be checking every couple of weeks to issue those after the fact clock hours. Yeah, so thank you so much for joining us today. We hope that your winter is restful and that you get a chance to recharge and connect with people. And we will see you next month. Thank you again to our presenters for all of the time that you took to prepare, and all the best to you. We'll see you again soon.